The restaurant was humming softly that night, that low, elegant murmur that always made her feel at home. Candlelight trembled against the glass walls and rain streaked down in slow silver lines. 20 years. I kept repeating it in my head like a prayer or maybe a warning. 20 years. 2 decades of laughter, of fights, of silent dinners, and slow forgiveness. And tonight I wanted to believe it meant something, that we'd made it. That love, bruised and battered, had somehow survived. She looked beautiful. Not the kind of beautiful that turns heads, but the kind that makes your chest ache. Her hair was tied up the way I loved, a few loose strands falling by her cheek. I watched her smile at the waiter, polite but distracted. Her hand kept brushing the side of her glass over and over, like she was trying to remember how to stay still. I should have known then. That restlessness, weighing that faint tremor under her skin, and it wasn't nerves. It was guilt. When I stood to make my toast, she looked up at me with that soft, rehearsed smile. The kind you give when you already know what comes next. My voice felt steady at first. I spoke about the little things, the house we built, the nights we almost gave up, the mornings we didn't. I said love was about endurance, about choosing the same person every day even when it hurt. She laughed quietly at that. Or maybe it was a sob, then she stood. I thought she'd take my hand. Instead, she reached for her glass. Her eyes, God, her eyes were glassy, wild. Not from the wine, but from something heavier. I have to say something, she whispered. Everyone turned. The waiter froze mid-step. It's strange how time slows down when your world is about to collapse. Her words came out like she'd practiced them, calm, even gentle. But beneath each one was a crack, a break in the foundation of everything I'd built around her. I've been seeing someone, she said. Just like that. No prelude. No mercy. I heard the rain tap faster against the windows like it couldn't wait for the storm. I didn't speak. Didn't blink. My fingers tightened around my glass until it slipped, shattered, and sent wine splashing across the table. Dark red spreading like a wound. The whole restaurant went silent except for the slow rhythmic clink of glass falling onto the floor. She kept talking. Something about honesty, about needing to be free, about how she never meant to hurt me. But all I could see were her lips moving. The lips that once promised forever, forming the name of another man. A stranger in my marriage, and then she stopped, mid-sentence. Her eyes rolled back, her body sagged forward, and the glass slipped from her hand. She hit the table first, then the floor. The sound was sickening, soft and final. Someone screamed. Someone else called for help. I didn't move. My world had already ended 30 seconds earlier. I just sat there, watching the life drain from her face, her hand limp in mine. The wine, still dripping off the edge of the table, looked like blood. My reflection in it didn't look like me anymore. People rushed around us. Chairs scraped. The waiter's voice cracked as he shouted for an ambulance. But I only heard one thing, her last word, the name, his name. And in that moment, something inside me turned cold. It wasn't rage. Not yet. Rage is messy. This was quieter, cleaner. A kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when the world holds its breath before it burns. She had been leaving me long before she said it. I just never noticed. And now she had collapsed in the middle of her confession, halfway between guilt and escape. Everyone else thought it was tragedy. I knew better. It was an unfinished sentence. She owed me the rest of it. I looked down at her at the faint pulse flickering in her neck and whispered, almost tenderly, "Who was he?" No one heard me. No one ever does when I speak softly. But I made a promise right there in that restaurant full of strangers and shattered glass. If she was leaving me, I would know who she was leaving me for. And when I found him, he would understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything you thought was yours. The sirens came fast, but the night moved slower. I remember the reflection of red lights flashing across the rain-soaked glass, the way they bled through the window and painted everything inside the restaurant in shades of warning. People whispered. Some stared. Some pretended not to, but I didn't move. I sat there with her purse still in my lap, her phone buzzing against the table, one text then another from a number I didn't recognize. They called his name once in the message. Just once. Ethan. It glowed on the screen like an ember, small, almost innocent, but hot enough to burn through my chest. At the hospital, the doctor said she'd had an arrhythmia. Stress-induced, maybe. "She's lucky you were there," he said. I nodded. I didn't tell him I hadn't done a thing. My hands were too busy shaking. Not from fear, from the realization that the woman I'd loved for 20 years had already belonged to someone else. When they let me into her room, the machines were still beeping, steady, mocking. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping off a confession. I sat beside her and stared at the oxygen mask covering the same mouth that had just set fire to everything I was. I should have cried. That's what love is supposed to do to you, break you open. But I didn't. All I felt was clarity. Her phone was in my pocket. I told myself it was to keep it safe, but I knew what I was doing. The screen lit up again. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have let her tell you, he knew. He knew she'd planned this. The toast, the confession, all of it. A public unburdening right before she walked away. And maybe she hadn't expected to fall. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the rain hammer the window outside her room. Funny how it sounded like applause. Slow, relentless, inevitable. Do you know what betrayal does to a man who's built his whole life on patience? It doesn't make him violent. It makes him surgical. I spent the next few hours pretending to be the worried husband, calling her sister, signing forms, thanking the nurses. Every word was automatic. My face wore concern like a mask, and everyone seemed relieved to believe it. People want their tragedies to be simple. They don't like the in-betweens and the grief that tastes like curiosity. At dawn, when the rain finally stopped, I looked out at the wet parking lot and whispered to myself, Ethan! The name felt wrong in my mouth, too soft. Too short for the man who'd shattered 20 years of loyalty with a text message and a stolen kiss. I imagined his face, his voice, the way she must have looked at him. That look I used to think belonged only to me. My stomach twisted, but then something steadied inside me. Maybe she'd live. Maybe she wouldn't, but either way, she had given me a gift, a name. And with a name, there's always a way back. That morning, before leaving the hospital, I kissed her forehead gently, the way I used to. The nurse smiled, said something about true love. I smiled back. If only she knew. As I walked out, her phone vibrated again. One last message from him. Call me when he's gone, I laughed. Quiet, bitter, sharp, I'm not gone, I whispered, pocketing the phone. Not yet. Outside, the world smelled of wet asphalt and clean endings. But for me, it was the beginning. Morning came like a stranger that refused to leave. The house was still, her scarf on the chair, her perfume lingering in the air like something haunting and half alive. I moved through the rooms as if trespassing in my own life. Every object was suddenly a clue, a witness. The coffee cup she'd left rinsed but not clean. The half-read novel on her nightstand with the corner folded like a secret bookmark. Even the bed, cold on her side, felt like an accusation. I made coffee I didn't drink. The bitterness in the air was enough. Her phone sat on the counter, black screen staring at me. I'd promised myself I wouldn't look. I broke that promise in seconds. Her texts with him weren't passionate. They were careful. Familiar. Like people who had built something dangerous and didn't want it to fall apart too soon. Soon, she'd written once. After our anniversary. It's only fair. Fair. The word twisted in me like glass. I scrolled back further. Photos. Voice notes. Little fragments of someone else's intimacy. His voice was calm, confident, maybe mid-40s. A man used to getting what he wanted. He said things like, you deserve peace and he'll be fine, he'll be fine. That's how she must have described me. Fine. Predictable. Harmless. I closed my eyes, breathing slow, counting the beats like a man steadying his hand before surgery. Rage is easy, it's heat and noise. But revenge is cold math. I spent hours in silence, studying their world through that small glowing screen. Addresses, dates, places. They met often. Not in hotels, but quiet spots, bookstores, cafes. Somewhere they could pretend to be ordinary. And the strangest part? She hadn't deleted a thing. Not even the messages that could ruin her. Almost like she wanted to be caught. Like the confession at dinner wasn't a mistake, but a test. Was she trying to free herself or punish me? By afternoon, the hospital called. She was stable, still unconscious but responsive. I thanked the nurse, hung up, and sat there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The sound seemed louder than it ever had before. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened our wedding album. Her smile, younger, unbroken. My hand on hers. The promise frozen in every photograph. I studied those pictures until they blurred, until I couldn't tell if I was remembering love or mourning it. Then the doorbell rang. That was her sister, eyes red, voice shaking, carrying a small overnight bag. "They said you could bring her things," she whispered. I nodded and took the bag, careful not to let her see the phone on the counter. She hugged me, brief, tight, pitying. When she left, I opened the bag. Nightgown, toothbrush, a paperback she never finished. And at the bottom, a small envelope with my name written in her handwriting. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Inside, a folded note. 3 lines. "I'm sorry for how you'll find out. Please don't hate me. You'll understand soon." No signature. No explanation. Just those words trembling in blue ink. I stared at them for a long time, the paper shaking slightly between my fingers. Understand soon. That wasn't an apology. It was a promise. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. Something bigger than a broken vow. I wasn't just the husband left behind. I was the audience she'd chosen for her performance, and now that curtain had fallen. It was my turn to step onto the stage. I folded the note, slipped it into my jacket, and looked toward the window. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt soaked in her absence. "All right," I whispered to no one. "Let's understand." I picked up her phone again, scrolled to Ethan's number, and saved it. Then I turned off the lights one by one. The house was quiet. Too quiet, but for the first time I liked it that way because silence is where plans begin. The hospital hums like a confession booth. Too clean, too bright, too full of people pretending to care. I sit beside her bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest beneath the thin blanket. The machine beside her beeps in perfect rhythm, mocking the chaos inside me. I should be holding her hand, whispering comfort. That's what good husbands do. But my hand rests on her phone instead, a small glowing tomb of truth. Grief gives you permission. That's what I told myself. Permission to see, to know, to understand what she couldn't say while awake. Her face looks peaceful, angelic even. But peace, I've learned, is just another kind of lie. I swipe the screen. The passcode unlocks. She never changed it. She trusted me. Or maybe she wanted me to find it. Maybe this was her final act. Not a collapse, but a performance, leaving the curtain open just enough for me to peek behind it. The messages start like business talk. "Lunch tomorrow? Need to discuss the proposal." Harmless, efficient, but then the shift. The tone softens, vowels stretch. "You looked beautiful in blue." "I missed your laugh." Words so small and ordinary they almost pass unnoticed. But once you know what they mean, they become lethal. And then, the final one, sent seconds before she raised her glass. "It's time. He deserves to know." He. Me. My name wasn't in that text, but I could feel it vibrating in every letter. My throat tightened. My hand trembled. Not from grief, and not anymore, but from control. Because control is the only thing that stands between pain and destruction. And there it was. The name. Ethan Shaw, a colleague, a friend. The man who helped me fix the garage door last summer. The man who toasted our anniversary last year with a smile too easy, too genuine. The man my daughter once called Uncle Ethan. The beeping beside me continued. Steady, soft, unbothered. I looked at her lying there, her wedding ring catching the faint hospital light. I remembered the way she used to twist it when she was nervous. She'd done it at dinner too, just before she spoke his name. The nurse came in, young, polite, voice careful. "She might wake soon. The doctor says she's responding well." I nodded, but my eyes never left the phone. I didn't pray for her to wake. I didn't pray for her to live. I prayed for clarity, for the kind of cold calm that only comes after your heart stops breaking. When the nurse left, I scrolled through every message again. Slow, deliberate, like a surgeon dissecting tissue. There were dates, places, lunches that matched the days she told me she was working late. It wasn't passion. It was precision. They'd built this thing quietly, methodically, like two people planning an escape. But she didn't escape, did she? No, she fell, and now I was left here in the white hum of this sterile room, holding her secrets like a weapon. I glanced at her face again. Pale, unmoving, almost holy in the stillness. "You wanted me to know." I whispered. Well, now I do. The phone's light dimmed, then went dark. And in that darkness I found my purpose beat. Because love had blinded me for 20 years. But betrayal sharpens the sight. The hours after midnight feel heavier here. The hum of the machines turns from background noise into something alive. A rhythm that breathes, whispers, accuses. The fluorescent lights above flicker once, then steady, throwing long shadows across her body. I sit there in that stale glow, feeling the air thin around me. The scent of antiseptic burns my nose. The floor tiles gleam like wet glass. It's strange how grief slows time, stretches it until seconds feel like hours, until one heartbeat becomes an entire lifetime. I lean closer to her. Her lips are dry, cracked slightly. A faint line of color creeps across her cheek. Maybe life returning, maybe just the illusion of it. Ethan Shaw, I murmur under my breath, tasting the name like poison. It burns going down, bitter and metallic. He was at the dinner that night, sitting 2 tables over, laughing, pretending not to notice me. I remember catching his eyes once across the room. There was something in that look, pity maybe, or guilt, or worse, confidence. The quiet arrogance of a man who thinks he's already won. I used to trust Ethan. We'd shared drinks, stories, even advice about marriage. I told him things about her, things only a husband should know. And now those memories feel contaminated, infected by something I can't wash off. The nurse walks by again, eyes soft with concern. You should get some rest, she says. I smile. I'm fine, but I'm not. I haven't slept since she fell. Every time I close my eyes, I see her standing in that restaurant. The candlelight trembling on her face, the red wine trembling in her glass, her lips parting just before she said his name. And then the fall. The scream, the silence after. I replay it like a film reel, frame by frame, until I notice things I missed before. The way she looked at me first, as if asking for forgiveness. Or permission. Or both. The phone sits on the tray beside her bed now. Black screen facing up, but I can still feel its presence. The weight of it. The way it hums like it knows it's guilty. I think about unlocking it again, scrolling back further, finding the start of it all. But I stop myself, not yet. Some truth should be digested slowly, like medicine or poison. I stand, stretch my stiff legs, and move toward the window. The city outside glows cold, streetlights painting the pavement in sickly gold. Somewhere down there, Ethan is probably asleep, warm beside his wife. Maybe he doesn't know what happened. Maybe he does. Maybe he's waiting, afraid I'll find him. Good, let him wait. Let him sweat in the dark, wondering how much I know, because I won't storm into his house. I won't shout or break things. That's not my way. Not anymore. No, I'll be patient. I'll learn his rhythm, the way he learned mine. I'll study him the way she studied me before she drifted away. Quiet, subtle, invisible. Revenge isn't rage. It's math. It's patience. It's precision. I walk back to her bedside and stare at her face again. Her eyelashes flutter, a twitch almost imperceptible. A sign of life. For a moment, I almost feel something like pity. She looks fragile, almost childlike. The hospital gown swallowing her small frame. I remember the first time I saw her. A rainy afternoon 25 years ago, her laugh echoing through the bookstore like sunlight. I told myself then that I'd protect her forever, and I did, even from myself. But now, sitting here with the ghost of that vow still echoing, I realize something, and protection and control aren't so different. One is given, the other is taken. I lean close again, my breath fogging the edge of the bed rail. You'll wake up soon, I whisper. And when you do, you'll tell me everything. Every lie, every secret, every reason you thought I deserved this. Her eyelids twitch once more. The machine beeps rise slightly, then fall. I wait for a word, a whisper, a sign. Nothing. Only the soft hum of the machines, steady, indifferent. I glance back at the phone. Its screen flashes briefly, and a notification, a text. My pulse spikes. I unlock it again, my fingers moving faster than thought. It's from Ethan, are you okay? I can't sleep. I keep seeing you fall. The timestamp reads 2:46 a.m. He doesn't know I'm reading this. He doesn't know I'm sitting here, watching his words light up the darkness like a confession. I smile. Small, controlled, bitter. I press read. Then I put the phone face down again. He'll see the status change. He'll know someone saw it. He'll panic. Good. Let him wonder who it was. The first move is always subtle, always quiet, always controlled because revenge doesn't start with action. It starts with a pulse. Morning bled through the blinds like thin knives of gold. The light didn't warm the room. It just exposed everything. The wrinkles in her sheets, the dried wine stain on my cuff, the faint tremor in my hand as I poured another cup of bitter hospital coffee. I watched the steam rise, curl, and vanish, like something leaving without saying goodbye. The nurses had changed shifts. The air smelled of disinfectant again, sharp enough to sting. She hadn't moved all night. The heart monitor kept its rhythm, a metronome of memory. Every beep was a reminder that she was still here, that fate hadn't finished with her yet, and neither had I. I glanced at her phone again. It sat beside the folded discharge papers, the screen now black, lifeless, hiding its treachery like a sleeping snake. I could almost hear it whisper, "Look deeper." So I did. I scrolled past Ethan's texts, past the flirtations and the plans, until I found the photos. A hotel room, neutral tones, a wine glass, a pair of shoes, hers, a man's shadow cast against the wall, the reflection of two bodies blurred in the mirror. Nothing explicit but real enough I didn't cry, not then. Instead I laughed, a quiet broken sound that caught in my throat. It wasn't madness. It was revelation. You think you know what betrayal feels like until it happens. Then you learn it's not fire, it's frost. It numbs you first, then cracks you open from the inside. I took out my notebook, the same one I'd used to jot down groceries, repairs, to-dos. I turned to a fresh page and wrote 2 words, Ethan Shaw, then below it, he deserves to know. Her last message. Her final truth, but what did she mean? Did Ethan tell her to confess? Did she plan to leave me right there in front of everyone? The perfect public humiliation wrapped in candlelight and anniversary wishes? Or did she mean something else? The question hung between us like smoke. I looked at her again, still unmoving, and thought, maybe she wanted to be caught. Maybe guilt had festered so long it begged for release, or maybe she simply wanted to hurt me one last time. The door creaked open. A doctor entered, his eyes tired but kind. She's stable, he said. Might wake soon. We'll know more in a few hours. I nodded, thanked him, and watched him leave. My fingers tapped the edge of her phone, once, twice, like testing the edge of a blade. Then a thought. Sharp. Precise. Ethan would check in again. Maybe he already had, and when he did, I wanted him to see something that would make his heart stutter the way mine had last night. I opened her messaging app, scrolled to their thread, and typed, "He knows." Just that. Nothing more. I hit send. The message went through. Delivered. Read. Then I turned the phone off. The quiet afterward was intoxicating, because revenge doesn't announce itself. It whispers first and softly, intimately, like an old lover's breath on your neck. I looked back at her, her chest rising and falling beneath the thin hospital blanket. "Rest," I murmured. "You'll need your strength when you wake." I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and walked out into the hallway. The tiles gleamed like ice beneath my shoes. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt almost musical, a requiem for something I hadn't buried yet. Outside, the morning was gray. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a sky the color of ash. Cars hissed by on wet asphalt. I stood there for a moment, breathing it all in, the smell of ozone, the faint chill in the air. It smelled like new beginnings. Then my phone buzzed, a message. From an unknown number. "Who is this?" "Ethan." I stared at the screen, a smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. My reflection in the glass looked different, colder, sharper. A man with purpose. I typed back slowly, deliberately, "You'll find out soon." Then I slid the phone back into my pocket and began to walk. No plan yet. Not a full one. But the seed was there, pulsing, growing. And I knew it would bloom, quietly, beautifully, inevitably, because grief doesn't kill a man. It reshapes him, and I was done being the victim of my own story. I crossed the parking lot, the hospital fading behind me like a scene closing its curtain. For the first time since the glass shattered at that restaurant, I felt steady, not healed, not whole, but awake. Every betrayal leaves behind a map, and if you're patient enough to follow it, And I planned to, step by step, message by message, truth by truth, until Ethan Shaw understood what it meant to lose everything, until she woke and saw what I had become. Because love, once broken, doesn't vanish. It changes shape. It sharpens. It learns to cut. I saw him the way you see a stain on a shirt and decide whether to point it out or let the person walk into a room and be judged by it. Ethan Shaw moved through the office like someone who'd never been taught to look guilty. Easy smile, steady handshake, a laugh that landed in the room like it owned the space. He wore a cologne that wanted you to think of success and clean linen. It lingered behind him in the conference room long after he left, the way his presence lingered in the small moments he shared with my wife. The first time I watched them together in the staff kitchen, she was laughing at something he said, head thrown back, hand on her hip. A casual touch that looked in daylight like a private joke. I smiled at them from across the room, the sort of smile that keeps a secret in its teeth. He didn't know I knew. He never saw the small changes I started to make. An extra pause before greeting him, a deliberately warm nod that let him think he'd been trusted. Observation became my new habit. I learned the cadence of his days, the time he took his coffee, the route he walked from the parking lot to his desk, the way he cleared his throat before he lied. Habits are small betrayals dressed as routines. Once you know them, you can predict the next movement, the next omission. At night, I'd return to a house that smelled faintly of her perfume like a ghost that hadn't yet learned to be quiet. The silence there was sharp and accusing. Every object held a memory like a splinter. I started a list in the back of a notebook she used to keep receipts in. Names, times, little things he said that didn't sit right if you tasted them slowly. I wasn't writing to accuse the world. I was making a map. A map is useful when you plan to move through someone's life without them noticing. There's something cruel about how charm works, how it disarms before it devours. Ethan had that kind of smile, the kind that made people want to believe him even when they shouldn't. I'd seen it at every company dinner, every project meeting. He was the golden boy, the dependable one, the kind of man people trusted with passwords and secrets. I used to be one of those people. Now every time he smiled, I saw the teeth behind it. Sharp, hidden, deliberate. He didn't know I watched him. He didn't see me studying the details, the way he adjusted his cufflinks when he lied, the subtle glance toward his phone before answering questions, the twitch in his jaw when her name came up in conversation.
Guilt has a rhythm.
His was slow, confident, rehearsed. Mine, however, had become patient, a quieter kind of power. At lunch, I'd sit across from him, nodding at his stories. He'd talk about his wife, about how they'd just bought a new house near the river. He spoke about her like she was a prize he'd already forgotten to cherish. I wondered, did he love her the way he said he loved mine? Or was it just sport to him? Did he look at my wife with the same carelessness he carried into every sentence? Once, as we walked back to our cars, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You've got the best woman, man. Don't ever take her for granted." The words landed soft like velvet wrapped around a knife. I smiled. "I won't," I said. But inside I felt something splinter. I wanted to ask him if he rehearsed that line with her too. That night I sat in my car outside his house. The windows were warm with light. I could see shadows, his, hers, and the faint flicker of a TV painting their living room gold. A perfect little world. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger burns too fast. What I felt was slower and deliberate, measured. I was building something now. I started keeping notes. Not on paper anymore, but in memory. I learned when his wife left for her yoga classes, when he walked his dog, when he stayed late for meetings. I wasn't stalking him. I was studying a system. And every system, no matter how flawless, has a weakness. People say revenge is toxic. Maybe. But poison can be precise, if you know how to dose it right. I began with small, harmless things. The sort of trivial intrusions that feel like butterfly wings until they stir a storm. A friendly text sent at the wrong hour. A voicemail left on his work phone that sounded like a drunk, sentimental cousin. I dropped off a book at his office with a page bookmarked to a passage about loyalty, signed only, "A concerned friend." Nothing that would make the papers. Nothing that would look like accusation. Just enough to make him pause, to make him listen, to make him adjust his eyes in the mirror and wonder if someone was watching. The first week he tightened. The second week, his jokes at meetings came out too loud. He checked his phone when I walked in. Small fissures, tiny admissions. The ledger in my head grew heavier with each small victory. The night he stayed late and didn't mention it. The morning he arrived with a faint perfume I didn't recognize on his collar. I cataloged these like a man catalogs the stars, not to own them but to know the pattern they make. I didn't want to ruin him. I wanted the world to do its work for me. I wanted him to trip over the truth and look up to see it shining back in his face. So I arranged things where truth could find him. I called his office pretending to be a client and asked to reschedule a meeting he'd already confirmed. His flustered reply was forwarded to his wife by mistake. I left anonymous notes with small facts only a lover would know, and slipped them under the mat of his mailbox so his neighbor might see them. Once I placed a photograph of my wife's handwriting, a grocery list with her distinctive loop on the letter Y, where he would find it in his car. He blamed himself. Then he blamed another excuse. Then he blamed late nights. Blame rattled through his life like a loose coin, jangling at impossible times. He started apologizing where nothing required apology. He grew defensive with his wife. He began to withdraw into his office more, to speak in clipped sentences at team lunches. People noticed. Not enough to act, but enough to let doubt sit comfortably in the corners of their conversations. There were nights I nearly lost myself. I would fold my hands and whisper her name until the syllables became prayer and accusation in the same breath. I'd picture them together and feel a cold salt in my mouth that tasted like betrayal and winter. I asked myself more than once whether this was the man I wanted to be, someone who nudges a life off course for the sake of a bruised pride. Sometimes the ledger looked less like justice and more like a graveyard I'd built stone by stone. In those moments I remembered how she'd written the note. You'll understand soon. Maybe she had. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe none of us would ever understand why hearts split in the way they do. But I also remembered the night she named him in front of a room that loved her, and how she'd fallen like a sentence unfinished. That image steadied me. If truth had been treated like a theatrical flourish by them, then I would be its stage manager. I would set the cues precisely, dim the lights at the right moment, and let their own choices do the rest. Then, one ordinary Thursday, my plan took the shape I'd been steering toward. Ethan arrived at work flustered, hair mussed, suit slightly off. He muttered something about a misdirected email and left for the restroom, phone in his hand. I watched him from across the bullpen as if I were reading the last page of a novel I'd helped write. He stood staring at a message, the color draining from his face. He walked out without his coffee, without the practiced charm he always wore like armor. Later that day I heard the whispering, the small soft conversations at the copier, the averted eyes in the elevator. He came into my office and closed the door with a hand that shook just enough for me to see. He spoke in a voice that had no swagger left. Do you know anything about... He started, then stopped. He didn't need to finish. I watched the man who'd smiled across barbecues and meetings become someone else. Someone smaller, human, honest in a way his charm never allowed. I felt no joy like fireworks. Instead, I felt a sorrowful satisfaction, like closing a wound neatly with a stitch. He would have to pick through the mess of his own making to answer questions he'd dodged. He would have to reconcile his casual cruelties with the hurt they caused. That, in its slow, inevitable way, was the undoing I wanted. I walked him to the door that evening. He looked at me as if I were a mirror he hadn't expected to find. I didn't, he said, voice raw. I put a hand on his shoulder, the same polite gesture I'd used 1,000 times and squeezed once quietly. You will, I said simply. You will know. He left with the weight of a man who's finally been given a choice. Confess or live with the quiet throttle of truth. Either way, his world was altered. Mine too, of course. I'd become someone whose hands could craft ruin from routine. I'd crossed a line that might not be uncrossed. But as I closed the door behind him and leaned my forehead against the wood for a long, slow breath, I felt something settle. Not peace exactly, but a kind of order. The ledger was still there, pages filled and folded, and the map I'd drawn would guide the next steps. My grief had been reshaped into something precise. My vengeance would be patient, not violent. A slow unmaking that left room for their own conscience to do the work. I turned off my lamp, the small pool of light retreating from the corners, and for the first time since the toast that shattered, I slept without waking to the taste of glass. She woke on a Tuesday. Rain again. Always rain when fate wants to whisper. The doctor called it a miracle, but I saw it differently. Her eyes fluttered open like someone remembering a dream they wish had ended differently. When she spoke, her voice was fragile, paper-thin. "Where am I?" she asked, though she already knew. The hospital room was the same sterile shade of forgiveness. White walls that never judged. The slow pulse of the heart monitor too calm for the chaos inside me. I told her she'd been out for 6 days. She blinked, tried to form words, but they scattered like frightened birds. "The dinner," she said finally, her lips barely shaping the syllables. "I remember the wine, the toast." Her voice cracked, and I reached for her hand more out of habit than tenderness. It felt cold. Not the cold of death, and I'd felt that before, but the cold of distance. The kind that no amount of warmth can bridge. The nurses called it shock. I called it mercy. Because forgetting, even pretending to forget, was easier than remembering. She looked smaller somehow. The woman who once filled every corner of the house with her presence now looked like a sketch of herself, drawn in faint lines. And still, when I leaned close, I could smell that faint trace of her perfume. Lilac and something sharper beneath it. A scent that clung like guilt. We spoke carefully at first. Polite phrases. Controlled smiles. 2 actors in a play neither of us auditioned for. The room was full of quiet machines and unspoken questions. Did she know I'd seen the messages? Did she remember saying his name before she fell? Her eyes flickered each time I said Ethan. Not with fear. No, fear would have been honest. It was something else. Guilt, maybe. Or grief for a life that had already burned down. That night I sat beside her bed long after visiting hours ended. The nurse turned off the lights, leaving only the low blue glow of the monitors. I watched the rhythm of her breathing. Each rise and fall measured, calm. I wondered if she dreamt of him. If her mind, free of consequence, wandered back to that same place where betrayal still tasted sweet. I wanted to believe she didn't. I wanted to believe that she was afraid to. When she stirred in her sleep, she whispered something. A name, maybe. Or a plea, I couldn't tell. But it was enough. Enough to remind me that forgiveness is a luxury reserved for the innocent. So I did what I do best. I planned. Not in rage this time. Rage is loud, it burns too quickly. What I felt was colder. More deliberate. Like a sculptor facing marble, already seeing the shape hidden inside. I would bring him into our home. I would let the walls remember what betrayal looks like up close. I wanted her to see him not through the haze of secrecy, but under the same light where our family used to sit. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt, the weight of truth pressing against every breath. The next morning, she smiled at me, weakly uncertain. "You stayed all night?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," I answered, and I meant it. I always stay until the end. It took 2 weeks before she came home. The house was spotless, and not out of care but control. I'd spent those days polishing grief into order. Every photograph straightened, every curtain pressed, every trace of her old life restored exactly as it had been. Except one thing. The ledger stayed open on my desk, her handwriting frozen mid-number as if time itself refused to forgive. When she walked in, the air changed. The faint click of her heels across the wooden floor echoed like trespass. She paused in the doorway, eyes darting between the furniture and me. "You kept everything the same," she said. There was a tremor in her voice, the kind that hides behind gratitude. "Of course," I said softly. "I wanted you to feel at home." But we both knew this was no longer her home. It was a museum. Every object was an exhibit of a life that used to be ours. That night she sat in her old chair by the window, the one where she used to read before bed. She stared out at the rain, at the faint reflection of herself in the glass. I watched her shoulders, how they rose and fell too quickly, how her hands clenched the fabric of her robe like a secret. Finally I asked, "Do you remember him?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Not empty, but heavy, like a room holding its breath. She didn't turn around. "No," she said. "I don't remember much of anything from that night." Lie. It slid off her tongue too smoothly. But I didn't call her out, not yet. Instead, I smiled. The kind that feels warm but tastes like ash. A few days later, I made the call. Ethan answered on the third ring, his voice casual, trusting. Hey, man, I heard about what happened. How's she holding up? I let a beat of silence linger. Just long enough for unease to creep in. She's recovering, I said. We're both trying. Actually, I was thinking we should all get together. Dinner like old times. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but enough. Dinner? Yes, I said. This Friday. 8 o'clock. She'd like that. When I hung up, my hand didn't tremble. My reflection in the glass didn't blink. The plan was simple, but simplicity is where power hides. Friday came draped in fog. The kind of night where sound feels muffled, where even the wind seems cautious. I set the table myself. Candles, her favorite china, the good wine. The chair across from me sat empty, waiting. The same chair from that night. I made sure of it. She looked beautiful when she came downstairs, though the color in her face hadn't fully returned. Her dress was pale blue, the same shade as the one she wore to that anniversary dinner. I could tell she didn't remember and or didn't want to, but I remembered everything. The texture of her sleeve under my hand, the way her smile faltered before she said his name, the taste of wine turning sour on my tongue. When the doorbell rang, she froze. Just for a second. Then she smiled that brittle practice smile. You invited him. I did, I said. We need to talk about what happened. Don't you think? Ethan stepped inside, carrying a bottle of wine like a peace offering. His eyes flickered between us, cautious, polite. I could smell his cologne before he spoke, the same scent that once lingered on her scarf. He complimented the house, the meal, her recovery. All the right words, spoken with all the wrong ease. We sat. We poured, we pretended. The laughter came too early, the smiles too wide. But I didn't break the illusion. Not yet. I let the night build itself into something fragile. And when the candles had burned low and the air felt thick enough to hold the truth, I raised my glass. To truth, I said, meeting both their eyes. To love that survives its own destruction. Her hand froze mid-lift. His throat tightened. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. It filled the room, pressed against the walls. Even the clock seemed to hesitate before ticking again, and then I smiled. A real smile this time. Calm. Certain. The kind of smile that comes when the pieces finally fit. Ethan was the first to break the silence. He cleared his throat, tried to steady his voice, but the tremor gave him away. That's quite a toast, he said, forcing a chuckle that died halfway through. Fitting, don't you think? I replied. We've all survived something, haven't we? My wife's eyes darted toward me, sharp, pleading, a warning hidden behind a fragile smile. It's getting late, she whispered. Maybe we should stay, I said gently, not looking at her. We haven't even finished dessert. The words hung in the air, deliberate and cold. She sat back down. I could feel her pulse in the silence, fast, uneven. Ethan shifted in his seat, his confidence slipping like a mask too heavy to wear. Look, I should go, he murmured. Didn't mean to intrude. You didn't, I interrupted. You were invited. The table between us felt smaller now. The flickering candles painted his face in soft, guilty light. He didn't know what I knew. Not the details, not the quiet way she'd confessed before she collapsed. But he could feel it, the truth vibrating just beneath the surface. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, voice steady. Do you know what mercy looks like, Ethan? He blinked, uncertain. I don't follow. Mercy, I said, is letting someone believe they got away with it. The color drained from his face. He looked at her, desperate, searching for rescue. But she couldn't even meet his eyes. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her lips parted in silent apology. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply let the truth fill the room, slow and suffocating. You see, I continued. When she woke up, the doctor said it was shock. Said she might forget. I hoped she would. But she didn't forget you, Ethan. Not completely. And neither did I. He stood up suddenly, chair scraping against the tile. This isn't funny. Who's laughing? I said. The candles hissed in the draft. For a moment, no one breathed. Then I pushed my chair back, slow, deliberate, and stood. You should finish your wine, I said quietly. It's expensive. It would be rude to waste it. He didn't move. Just stood there, caught between guilt and fear, between the door and the truth. Finally, I smiled again, softer this time. Relax, I'm not going to hurt you. I glanced at her, her eyes wide, glistening. That's not the kind of man I am. He hesitated, then sat back down, reluctantly, nervously. I poured more wine into his glass, the dark red liquid catching the candlelight like blood. The air smelled of oak and something heavier. Regret, maybe. She whispered my name. Barely audible. Please, don't. I turned to her, my voice low, almost tender. Don't what? Tell the truth? You of all people should understand the cost of silence. Her breath hitched. A tear slid down her cheek, and for the briefest second I felt something. Pity, maybe. Or memory. But it passed. I looked back at Ethan. You once told her you couldn't lie forever. Turns out you were right, he froze. The recognition hit him like a slap. His mouth opened, then closed again. She told you, he whispered. She didn't have to. The clock ticked once, sharp, intrusive. The room seemed to shrink, then I raised my glass again. To endings, I said. May they be clean. We drank. Or at least I did. He only stared at the rim of his glass, eyes distant, jaw tight. When it was over, he left quietly. No goodbyes, no excuses. Just the sound of the door shutting like a final breath. She stood there, still trembling.
What did you do?
She asked. I turned off the candles one by one. Nothing, I said. Not yet, her voice cracked. You're not the same. I looked at her, really looked. The woman who once laughed in my arms, now a stranger wearing her face. Neither are you, I said. Maybe that's fair. As I walked upstairs, I heard her sob once soft, restrained. The kind of sound that might have broken me once. But not tonight. Tonight, it only confirmed what I already knew. Some silences aren't peace. They're aftermath, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I whispered to myself, not in anger, not in pain, but in something colder. Mercy always has an expiration date. They called it an accident. A simple, tragic twist of fate. That's what the headline said. That's what the neighbors whispered. But I remember the sound of the glass as it slipped from her hand. Slow, graceful, almost deliberate. The way it shattered across the table like a question left unanswered. The paramedics said she was gone before they even reached the door. I didn't argue. What was the point? The truth had already died long before she did. I kept her things untouched for weeks. Her perfume still clung to the curtains, stubborn and sweet. Her coffee cup sat beside the sink, a faint ring of lipstick on the rim. The world had moved on, but the house refused to. It waited. I waited. For what, I'm not sure. Justice, maybe. Or punishment. Sometimes they looked the same. People came by with casseroles and condolences. They meant well, I think. One of them even said, "You're lucky she went peacefully." Peacefully. I almost laughed. There was nothing peaceful about the way her eyes widened before the end. Not in fear, not in pain, but in recognition. She knew. She knew what I'd done, or maybe just what I'd allowed to happen. At night, I replay it. The dinner, the wine, the trembling silence. The way Ethan's hands shook as he set down his glass, the way she avoided his gaze. I didn't plan it. That's what I tell myself. But maybe that's the lie I chose to live with. Maybe the truth is simpler, I just didn't stop it. The police asked routine questions. I answered them perfectly. The truth is easy when you strip it of feeling. Yes, she'd been recovering. No, there was no argument. Yes, she'd been drinking. All true, technically. All incomplete. They never asked what kind of man stands still while the woman he loves collapses. They never asked what kind of husband watches, silent as consequence finds its way home. Now the house is quiet again. Not peaceful, not warm, just quiet. Sometimes I hear her voice in the stillness. Not words, just the sound of her breathing beside me, imagined, remembered. And in that half-dream I always turn, expecting to see her eyes. But it's only the reflection in the wine glass. Red, endless and accusing. I keep the bottle she loved most on the counter, the same brand we opened that night. I pour one glass for her, one for myself. I've done it every evening since the funeral. Ritual, I suppose. Or punishment. Maybe both. People say forgiveness brings closure. They don't understand. Forgiveness is a door that only opens one way, and she's not the one knocking. Ethan didn't come to the funeral. Not a call, not a flower, not even a whisper of regret. He vanished the way cowards do. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a shadow retreating from light. I saw the way his office desk emptied overnight, How his name disappeared from company memos, how no one dared mention him. As if silence could erase guilt. As if running could cleanse what was already written. But I remember his face the night she died. The flicker of panic behind his eyes. The way his lips parted, ready to confess or collapse, I'll never know which. He reached for her, then froze, looking at me instead. That pause, that hesitation told me everything. He wasn't mourning. He was calculating. Just like me, weeks passed. I went back to work. People spoke softer around me, as if grief had made me fragile. They didn't realize grief makes you sharp. You start noticing things, the way people avoid your eyes, the small betrayals hidden in polite smiles. I saw Ethan's name again once, buried in a forwarding address for HR files. A small town 3 hours north, quiet, forgettable. That's where ghosts go to hide. I thought about visiting, just to see him. Not to hurt him, not in any way the law would recognize. Just to talk, to look him in the eyes and ask if it was worth it. If she was. But I didn't go, not then, because revenge, I've learned, isn't about action. It's about restraint, the waiting, the silence. That's where the punishment lives. Sometimes I write his name on paper. Ethan Shaw, black ink, steady hand. I underline it twice. Never cross it out. There's a kind of balance in that, the unfinished nature of it all. He gets to keep his life. I get to keep the story. I've come to believe we're all authors of our own cruelty. Hers was betrayal. His was cowardice. Mine was patience. And in the end, patience wins. It always does. W tonight, I set 2 glasses again. Her wine, my whiskey. The rain taps the window like a metronome, slow and constant. I can almost see her silhouette reflected in the glass. Head tilted, smile half-formed, apology suspended between breaths. She used to say, "Love forgives everything." Maybe that's true. But forgiveness and justice, they don't share the same bed. One heals. The other remembers. I remember. The house has learned to keep quiet. Even the walls seem to hold their breath when I move through them. The pictures still hang. Her face frozen in laughter, our daughter's small hand clutching hers. I can't take them down. That would feel like mercy. And mercy, I've learned, is a lie people tell themselves when they're too weak to remember. Tonight marks 1 year. 1 year since the restaurant. Since the glass. Since the fall. I've aged 10 in that time, not in body, but in silence. Silence ages faster than time. It eats through memory until all that's left is instinct. The table is set again. Same linen, same silverware. A single candle burning low. It flickers the way her pulse did. Faint, defiant, dying. I pour the wine carefully, the way I did that night. Old habits don't die. They haunt. I sit where she once sat. I let the wine breathe, the way she used to teach me. She said oxygen makes flavor. I wonder what truth makes of it. The glass trembles in my hand, not from sorrow, not anymore, but from recognition. The kind that comes when you finally accept what you've done, or what you haven't. No one ever proved anything. The police called it a relapse, a tragic coincidence. They wrote their reports, closed their files, and moved on. Everyone did. Everyone except me. Because every night since, I've seen her eyes in the moment before she fell. That flash of guilt, that small, silent plea. It wasn't for forgiveness. It was for understanding. For me to see her as human, flawed, afraid. I do, God help me, I do, and yet I still raise my glass. To us, I whisper, voice steady, the words heavy with ghosts. For better or worse. The wine burns going down, metallic, sharp, almost sweet at the end. Like memory. The candle dies first, then the room goes still. I sit in the dark, the empty glass between my hands, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that refuses to stop. Somewhere beyond the walls, the world keeps living, laughing, moving, forgetting. But here in this silence, I've found my own kind of peace. Not the kind they write about. The other kind. The one made of quiet victories, unfinished vengeance, and love that refuses to die properly. Because forgiveness is for the living. And some of us never made it that far.